Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at a whole stack of news stories coming out of New Zealand.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about why they matter. Not just what happened, but, connecting the dots. And I think there's going to be some stuff that's pretty surprising.
Let's dive right in. First up, a story that's kind of making waves in the world of online content creation. It involves a popular YouTuber named IShowSpeed. And he might be in a bit of visa trouble.
Yeah, so he's here on a visitor visa. And of course, visitor visas, you're not really supposed to work.
Right.
But Immigration New Zealand's looking at whether his live streams and the content he's making while he's here, if that could be considered work,
Oh.
which would violate his visa conditions. And, it really brings up some interesting questions about how these old visa rules apply to YouTubers and these digital nomads.
Yeah, you really got to think, are we ready for this kind of like blurring of tourism and work in this new digital world? Like, what if New Zealand became like a huge hotspot for these creators?
It's a really complex issue, and it's going to affect things like tourism and immigration policy and even the creative industries.
Yeah, for sure. Now, shifting gears a little bit, but sticking with this theme of attracting skilled workers, we're going to turn to healthcare. Apparently, almost half of New Zealand's recent nursing grads can't find jobs,
Yeah.
which is forcing a lot of them to look overseas.
Mm.
That's a head scratcher.
It is.
If we have a nursing shortage, why can't we employ these grads? What's going on?
Well, it seems like understaffing and budget constraints within Te Watu Ora are a big part of it.
Okay.
Hospitals just don't have enough positions for all these new grads, even though the demand is there.
Yeah.
And it's particularly tough on Maori and Pacifica grads.
Right.
They're kind of disproportionately affected by this whole job shortage.
It's like a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
We're putting all this energy into training these people up, and then they have to leave because we don't have jobs for them. What kind of long-term impact is that going to have on healthcare here?
It's not good. It could make the strain on our healthcare system even worse, leading to longer wait times, more burnout for the staff that are already here,
Right.
and possibly even worse care.
Right.
To fix this, we're going to need more funding, but we also have to address the deeper issues within Te Watu Ora itself.
Yeah, big time. Speaking of navigating tricky situations, it seems our Prime Minister and Finance Minister got into a bit of a fender bender the other day.
Yeah, just a little accident near Wellington Airport.
Thankfully, nobody was hurt.
Right. Just a little reminder that everyone makes mistakes, even the people in charge. But it also shows how much pressure and scrutiny they're always under.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of pressure, educators are feeling it too. There are some big changes happening in education. The government's launching a whole revamp of literacy and math programs. They want to see better educational outcomes by 2030. Plus, New Zealand's very first charter school is opening up.
Right. Lots of big changes. These literacy and math programs, they're going to get more funding, and they're really focused on younger students. The goal is to have 80% of Year 8 students meeting those curriculum levels. And then the charter school. That's in Christchurch, and it's a completely new approach to education. It's going to be for students who maybe haven't done so well in those traditional schools, give them a more personalized experience.
Interesting. I'm really curious to see how that charter school thing plays out here. Definitely going to be interesting to watch. And speaking of sparking debate, the Education Review Office is wondering if NCEA Level 1 is even relevant anymore.
Yeah, there's this feeling that NCEA Level 1 isn't really getting students ready for higher education or the workforce.
Okay.
Some people say it's just not rigorous enough. Others think it's a good stepping stone, especially for those who aren't going to uni.
It's hard, isn't it? You need to find that balance between giving students a good foundation and making sure they have the skills for this, crazy world that's always changing. And now from the challenges in the classroom, we're going over to the West Coast. The town of Westport has a climate change dilemma on their hands.
Yeah, the town has been hit by floods over and over again, and now there's a proposal to move the entire town to higher ground. Pretty dramatic stuff.
Wow, moving a whole town. That's huge.
Yeah.
What are some of the big challenges with a project like that?
Oh man, the logistics are just mind-boggling.
Yeah.
You got to find a good spot, get the money, figure out how to get everyone on board. And then there's the emotional toll, leaving your home, all that. It's not just about moving buildings, it's about keeping a community together.
And who's going to pay for it? Is it going to be all government funding, or are there other options?
It's going to be a mix of public and private investment. These public-private partnerships are becoming more and more common for big infrastructure projects, and the plan is to do it in phases.
Okay.
Move important things first, like schools and civil defense. That way you build confidence and show that the new town is going to work.
Interesting. It'll be fascinating to see how this unfolds. It really shows the kinds of tough choices communities all over the world are going to have to make as climate change gets worse. But for now, let's switch from the natural world to the world of finance. The Reserve Bank just made a big move. They cut the OCR.
Yeah, the OCR, that's the official cash rate.
Right.
It's the interest rate the Reserve Bank charges commercial banks for lending money. So by cutting this rate, they want to encourage people to borrow and spend, which should help the economy.
Okay.
And this is particularly important now because the housing market has been so slow.
So what does this mean for regular people? Are mortgage rates going to go down?
Maybe. Some banks have already started lowering their home loan rates because of the OCR cut.
Okay.
This could be good news for people with mortgages, and it might get more people buying houses.
So is this good news if you want to buy a house?
It might be. But there's also a worry about inflation. If the OCR cut makes people spend more, prices could go up. The Reserve Bank's trying to walk a fine line here. They want to boost the economy, but they don't want inflation to get crazy.
A tough balancing act. And speaking of balancing acts, it looks like the government's trying to juggle a few things at once as they try to help both rural communities and the primary sector.
Yeah, they want to find that sweet spot where farms are doing well, the environment's protected, and we're still competitive globally. They've got a few things going on, like cutting costs for farmers and making regulations less complicated.
Interesting. And it makes you think how this focus on helping the primary sector could affect house prices too. If rural communities are doing well, could that mean more people want to live there?
That's a good point. It just shows how everything's connected.
Yeah.
Helping rural communities could really impact the housing market, especially in those growing regions.
It's definitely a complex web. But before we get too lost in all the connections, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back soon to keep exploring the news in New Zealand. Stay with us.
And we're back. Before the break, we were talking about those government efforts to support rural communities and the primary sector. It's a tough one, right? Trying to make sure our farms are doing well, but also protecting the environment.
Yeah, it's like trying to bake a healthy cake. You got to get the ingredients and the amounts right.
Yeah.
Speaking of ingredients, let's talk about concrete. Seems like it's having a bit of a moment in the spotlight for infrastructure projects.
Yeah, concrete's getting a bit of a comeback. People are realizing it's durable, it's cost-effective, and it's really versatile.
So it's more than just sidewalks.
Oh, way more. Think bridges, highways, ports. Concrete New Zealand and a bunch of industry experts are saying we should use it for big things like Auckland's Port Motorway and parts of State Highway 1. Their argument is that concrete lasts for ages, needs less maintenance, and saves money in the long run, especially for those long-term projects.
Yeah, it makes sense to build things that last. But what about the environmental side? Isn't concrete bad for the planet?
It can be. Traditional concrete does produce a lot of carbon emissions. But there are some new ways of doing things that are a lot better for the environment, like roller compacted concrete, or RCC. It uses a drier mix, so you need less cement, and that means fewer emissions.
So it's like a greener concrete recipe.
Exactly. They tried it out in Hamilton recently for a road project, and it worked really well. This RCC thing could be a game changer for New Zealand. We could build strong stuff without trashing the planet.
Now that's exciting. Seems like we're entering a whole new world of construction where being eco-friendly and building things to last go together.
Okay.
But let's shift gears a bit. From building a better future to tackling a present danger, organized crime.
Yeah, the government set up this new group called the Ministerial Advisory Group.
Okay.
And they're going to try and tackle this growing problem. It's not just about reacting to crime, though.
Right.
It's about stopping it before it happens, making New Zealand a place where these criminal organizations just can't operate.
So like cutting off the head of the Hydra.
That's it. They're going after the money these organizations need to survive, disrupting their supply chains, and getting law enforcement and regulatory agencies to work better together. It's kind of ironic, actually. They're funded by the Proceeds of Crime Fund.
Poetic justice right there.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest roadblocks they're facing?
Organized crime is sneaky. They operate in the shadows, and they find ways to exploit weaknesses in our systems.
Right.
Plus, they work across borders. Their tactics are always changing, so you need really good intelligence. You have to cooperate with other countries, and you need to understand how their networks work.
Seems like a pretty tough job. How long do they have to come up with a plan, and how will we know if they're successful?
They've got about 8 months to develop a strategy, and we'll know they're succeeding if they can disrupt criminal activity, seize illegal assets, and basically make New Zealand a place organized crime wants to avoid.
It's a fight worth fighting, that's for sure. And speaking of battles, Air New Zealand's facing some headwinds of their own. There's a global shortage of planes because of those engine maintenance delays.
It's causing all kinds of problems. They're having trouble keeping up with travel demand, both here and overseas. It just shows that even a big company like Air New Zealand can't escape these global issues.
It's like a traffic jam but in the sky. How are they dealing with this, and what does it mean for passengers?
Well, they've had to change their flight schedules, which can be annoying, especially if you have connecting flights.
Yeah.
And we might see ticket prices go up as they try to make up for lost revenue.
And what about their competitors? Are other airlines jumping at this chance to grab some market share?
Air New Zealand's still the big player here. They've got about 80% of the domestic market.
Right.
But these delays could give smaller airlines a chance to try new routes and get more customers. It'll be interesting to see how things change while this is going on.
Even when there are problems, there are opportunities. But let's come back down to earth for a minute and talk about healthcare again. It seems the government's not just focusing on getting new nurses. They also want to keep the experienced ones we already have and attract even more.
They're putting money towards recruiting 50 senior doctors and specialist nurses, especially in areas where they need them most, like mental health and critical care.
So they're thinking short-term and long-term, getting more people in now and building a sustainable workforce for the future.
Right. They know they need new people, but they also need experienced professionals to mentor and lead within the healthcare system.
It's like building a house. You need a solid foundation and skilled craftspeople to make sure it stands the test of time. But getting more staff is just one piece of the puzzle, right? What about fixing the things that cause burnout and staff shortages in the first place?
That's a great point. They've set aside $12 million for small improvements to hospitals like repairs and new equipment,
Okay.
which is good. But to really fix the big problems like workload pay and career paths, we need a bigger, more long-term plan.
Yeah, it's like a garden. You can't just plant seeds. You got to make sure the soil is good and the conditions are right for things to grow. Speaking of growth, let's get back to the economy for a sec. That OCR cut by the Reserve Bank, it's having an impact on a lot of things, especially the housing market.
It's a bit of a gamble, that OCR cut. They want to boost the economy, but they also risk making inflation worse. And we're already seeing the housing market react to this change. It's been pretty quiet lately, but it's showing signs of life again.
So are we going to see house prices go up again?
It's possible. Trade Me Properties data shows asking prices going up and houses selling faster in a lot of areas. Auckland's back in the $1 million club for average house prices.
That's a big change. But doesn't it make things even harder for people who are trying to buy their first home?
It could. Higher prices might be good for sellers, but they make things tougher for first-time buyers. The government has to be careful with this OCR cut, and they need to take steps to make sure housing is still affordable for everyone.
It's a complicated problem with no easy answers. But as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, it really hits me how connected all these news stories are, like that OCR cut. It doesn't just affect the housing market.
Right.
It also affects how much the government can do to help rural communities and invest in important things like healthcare.
Exactly. It shows why it's important to look past the headlines and understand how everything is linked together.
And now in our final segment, we're going to zoom in on the human side of these stories. We'll explore how these events are affecting the lives of everyday New Zealanders. Stay with us. We're back for the final part of our deep dive, and this time we're going to shift our focus a bit. We've been talking about the big picture, but now let's zoom in on the people.
Yeah, let's look at the human side of these stories, how these events are affecting everyday New Zealanders.
It's easy to get caught up in the numbers and the policy debates, but at the end of the day, it's real people who are dealing with these changes.
Absolutely. Their stories help us understand what's really going on.
So let's start with healthcare, something that affects all of us at some point. We've talked about the nursing shortage and trying to recruit more doctors and nurses.
Right.
But what does that mean for patients and families who are trying to navigate the healthcare system?
Imagine a family in the emergency room waiting for news about their loved one, or a parent who can't find a specialist for their child. That's the reality of the situation. Getting more staff is important, but we also need to fix the things that are causing these long wait times and making healthcare workers burn out.
Yeah, it's about creating a system that's not just efficient, but also kind. A system that takes care of everyone involved. And, those government efforts to support rural communities, that's got a human side too.
Definitely. Think about the farmer who's struggling with rising costs in uncertain markets, or the small business owner in a rural town who's barely keeping their doors open.
Right.
Their livelihoods depend on the primary sector. The government's trying to help them financially, but also give them some hope and stability.
It's about recognizing that rural communities are important and making sure their voices are heard. Now let's talk about housing, another area that has a big impact on people's lives.
That OCR cut and the fact that the housing market seems to be picking up again, it's causing mixed feelings.
Yeah.
Some people are worried because it might make it even harder to buy a house, especially if you're a first-time buyer. But if you already own a home, you might be happy because your property is worth more.
It's a complicated situation. The housing market isn't just about buying and selling houses. It's about dreams and security. We need to find that balance between affordability and a stable market so that everyone has a chance to own a home.
Absolutely. Housing isn't just an investment, it's the foundation for a good life. And that brings us back to what we've been talking about today, the human side of these news stories.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? Visa rules, education infrastructure, organized crime. But we've tried to keep people at the center of it all.
It's easy to get lost in the big picture discussions, but we have to remember that real people are affected by these events.
We've seen how global trends and local challenges all come together to create this complex and constantly changing world. But in the end, it's how everyday Kiwis adapt and overcome these challenges that will determine our future.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep talking about these issues, because when people are informed, they can make a difference. And together, we can create a better future for all New Zealanders.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through New Zealand's news. We hope you've learned something new, had some things to think about, and maybe even sparked your curiosity about the world around you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning.